So did
Okay, I'm going to go back and do the share screen again.
We send the recording out every week, usually tonight, the night of the class, so that you don't have to take notes if you don't want to.
And what happened to the? Why doesn't it want to?
I do.
Hold on.
Do you want to?
Oh, I know what the problem
A
is.
little bit, do a little introduction and review.
No, the problem is I put it into this full screen mode and I get it out of it. Yeah, here. That didn't seem to work. We lost Cheryl. I'm going to go back here.
Oh, she's back.
Here we go. Okay.
Ah,
So, live your life, and the fear of death can never enter your heart. Trouble no one for their religion. Respect others in their view, and demand that they respect yours too. Love your life, perfect your life, beautify all things in your life. Seek to make your life long and its purpose in the service of your people. Prepare a noble death song for the day when you pass over the great divide. Always give a word or a sign of salute when meeting or passing a friend, even a stranger, when in a lonely place. Show respect to all people and grovel to none. When you arise in the morning, give thanks for food and the joy of living. If you see no reason to give thanks, the blame lies only on yourself. Abuse no one and no thing, for abuse turns the wise into fools and robs the spirit of its vision. When it comes your time to die, be not like those whose hearts are filled with the fear of death, so that when their time comes, they weep and pray for a little more time to live their lives over again in a different way. Sing your death song and die like a hero going home.
ah,
So there we have Chief Tecumseh. And I'm going to now just go back over to, let's see, screen share, and I'm going to go kick us into the, here's what we're covering. And this is, let's see, can we get,
Oh, Captain,
oh,
my
I knew
Captain,
I forgot something. I have to shut off
our
that. Hold
fearful
on.
trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack.
Sorry about that.
We did Whitman a few weeks ago.
So here we are here. This is a kind of our catch-all category. There's 10 subjects that you'll see in the syllabus, and we've done 3 of them. We have recordings available of all of them, and there's handouts as well that are posted on the website. So if you're missing any, just ask if you want to see any more. But today we're just doing another part of this thing we just called mysticism, East and West. And what goes with it, let's go to the next one, is we've already did the first thing, art as a spiritual endeavor. And we talked a bit on the science side about the Tao of physics. And this, we touched on this Langland's program. There are actually 2 mathematicians we talked about, Langland's and Grothendieck. And I didn't mention this, but I'll bring it up now. What physicists are trying to do is come up with the fundamental elements that make up the world around us. And right now they think those are strings, vibrating strings that make up all of the particles and generate all of the forces and fields that we have. Well, the mathematicians are doing their own thing. And so Langland's is looking at what is the comparable kind of basic element in mathematics. And he thinks it might be in harmonic analysis, having to do with linkages to number theory. And Grothendieck, as we saw, is doing a lot of work in algebraic geometry. And he has some idea that the basic units are in algebraic geometry, and he called them sheaves. So here you have physics and math trying to come up with some common underlying, what are the most basic elements that describe everything. We touched on meditation. We're going to touch on Kabbalah next time, not this time. But this time we're going to touch on a little bit on tarot, not just to get things going. And then this time we're going to go through the book of Enoch, which is part of the so-called Gnostic Gospels. We'll deal with Taoism, and then we have some other things we're going to cover. So let me just start to skip through these things. I'm going to put this thing into slideshow mode, and we'll see. This is what we covered for art, and here's the poem, another poem by Mary Oliver, The Tao of Physics. In this Langland's program, we touched on meditation. Yoga we've touched on in the Yoga Sutras. We're not going to do a lot of it with alchemy, but just to keep it in mind here, it is something that's very mystic, that most people get caught up with thinking there's a push to try and turn lead into gold. But actually there was a lot of other things where they're trying to actually, through some mystical traditions that we really don't have access to find the essence of whatever made up everything. And that allowed them to do these sorts of activities.
It was really a symbolic exercise, turning lead into gold. It was really psychological and spiritual.
Right. And if we have any time, we'll come back and do something with tarot. Tarot, we've got some cards up in the right corner here that are apparently, it started in the middle of the 15th century in parts of Europe, which led to the cards being used for divination and things related to that. So there's 78 cards in the deck, so 52 plus 26. And and people can do interesting things with this. Hopefully we'll have time to come back to this, but for now I'm just skipping over it. And now we're going to go back off into what we call these Gnostic Gospels. These are things that were there at the start of 0 AD. And many of these, there's probably at least 100 of these, we're not sure. Many of these were used in early Christian parishes through, all throughout the Roman Empire. And in 325 AD, a Council of Nicaea was convened, and they whittled it all down to just 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So many of these were there, but they never, they simply were ignored out of the canon. So we have up here the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And for example, and she was clearly very close to Jesus of Nazareth. And as we saw in there, the apostle Peter approached Mary and said, "What in the world did he tell you?" And she started telling him, and he said, "Well, he never taught us any of that. What in the world is going on here?" So, she was incredibly close to Jesus of Nazareth. So we're going to go into this now with there's in the book of Genesis, if in the Talmud and the Old Testament, there's just a very short snippet where the name Enoch appears. So this is it. There's no more of Enoch. Okay, so it says that when his father Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch, and then he lived another 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Now, when Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. But Enoch didn't die. He walked with God 300 years later. And no one knows what this phrase "walked with God" is. It just says because God took him. That's all we know. So if you go into the New Testament, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so forth, you'll find that Enoch is cited over 100 times. It's very easy today to do that. You can just do a search function and you'll see over 100 citations to Enoch. So all of the apostles were quite aware of Enoch, and yet here he is in this little snippet here in Genesis and nothing more. The thing that Enoch was associated with was his great-grandson was Noah. And Noah was told by the Lord in Genesis that I will blot out from the earth the human beings I've created, because the people that were on the earth, the sons of God, that there were fair and took wives for themselves and all that they chose, and they ended up having children of all sorts that were very wicked and led to all kinds of terrible things. And so the Lord was sorry that he'd done this and instructed Noah just after this to build the ark. And so that's kind of it for how Noah got in there. So now we're going to go back to screen share, and I'm going to go to, hold on one sec. I'm going to go pull up a YouTube video, which will go into the book of Enoch.
All of these items are on the resources page on our Aleph Talks website, by the way. If you want to poke around in there, we don't necessarily cover everything in class, and we've been working on really expanding and beefing up the resources page. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that we don't always go into, but it's usually related to something that we went into.
Right.
But it's kind of like a bibliography.
I think this is going to do it. We get this out of the way.
We just worked on it some more this weekend, which was fun. Gonna have a whole new website soon. And interface.
This is our internet kicking in.
This video is brought to you by Speakeasy. Access the vibrancy of a university campus wherever you happen to be. The Book of Enoch is the ultimate example of spin-off literature. It's over 100 chapters long, thousands and thousands of words, but it's based off of a fairly obscure biblical character, Enoch. The Hebrew Bible has very little to say about him. In the book of Genesis, he appears briefly in the genealogy of Adam. After fathering Methuselah and a bunch of other kids, the text simply says, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more because God took him. Wait, there's got to be more backstory here, right? What does because God took him even mean? Well, early Jews and Christians were rarely satisfied with such vague biblical passages, which leads us to its spin-off, the Book of Enoch. This text was so popular for early Christians that even the New Testament cites it. The book of Jude, the second to last book in the New Testament, directly references Enoch, chapter 1, verse 9. But for a book that was so popular for ancient Jews and Christians, very few people today know about it. So what is the Book of Enoch and what does it really say? First of all, there's not just one Book of Enoch. In fact, the Book of Enoch typically refers to First Enoch. However, there's also a Second Enoch, which probably dates back to the 1st century CE, but is preserved in later manuscripts written in the Church Slavonic language. And there's a Third Enoch. It survives in Hebrew and was preserved by Rabbinic Judaism. This video will be focusing on First Enoch. The next consideration, calling it the Book of Enoch is kind of a misnomer. First Enoch is a compilation of several texts stitched together. There are obvious and abrupt seams between sections that are best explained by the theory that someone brought them all together into a compilation sometime in the past. First Enoch has 5 major sections and 2 appendices, which you can see on screen. The oldest sections of the text probably date back to the 4th or 3rd century BCE. However, the most complete manuscripts of the text date to the 15th or 16th centuries, written in the Ethiopic language. Ethiopic, also known as Ge'ez, is a Semitic language, a cousin of Hebrew, Arabic, and Amharic, one of the main spoken languages in Ethiopia today. Ethiopic is the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, kind of like how Latin was historically used in liturgies for Catholics, or the Coptic language for Coptic Orthodox Christians. So you can see that the Book of Enoch had a long journey from when it was first composed to when our most complete manuscripts were created. Enoch was probably originally written in Aramaic before being translated into Greek and then finally into Ethiopic. Big chunks of the Aramaic version of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at the site of Qumran. One Dead Sea Scroll fragment contains several sections of Enoch in one text, which shows that the different sections were already circulating as one compilation by the 1st century BCE. In all, 90 different manuscripts of First Enoch exist in some form or another. However, some of the manuscripts have big differences compared to earlier versions. This is why if you're going to read it for yourself, it's really important to find a scholarly translation that tries to account for all of the manuscript variations. I personally recommend the Hermeneia translation by George Nicholsburg and James Vanderkam. It's published by Fortress Press. This is not a advertisement. It's literally just the best version I could find when I was researching this episode. Okay, that's a quick overview of the text itself. It's comprised of several texts stitched into one, It was originally written in Aramaic, but its most complete manuscripts are written in Ethiopic. Parts of it probably date to the 4th century BCE, but it also has sections that date to a few centuries later. But what about the content? What does First Enoch actually say? Like I said, the best way I can describe the Book of Enoch is that it is spin-off literature. It takes two tiny, tantalizing snippets from Genesis and expands them into a whole book of fantastic visions and stories. We already saw the first blurb, a few short sentences that says, God took Enoch. The second blurb, which inspires the entire opening section of First Enoch, is an odd story from Genesis 6, 1 through 4, about divine beings having sex with humans. Genesis says that before Noah's flood, divine beings called B'nai Elohim, which literally translates to children of God, come down to earth to have sex with human women, who then give birth to beings called Nephilim. The text says these Nephilim were the mighty men of old, warriors of renown. That's it, nothing else. No more mention of who these Nephilim were or their exploits, no backstory about these sons of God. And you know what that means? It's a story ready for a spin-off. Enoch vastly expands these few verses into the Book of the Watchers. The sons of God are no longer a vague category of heavenly beings, but a whole society of fallen angels called the Watchers, led by their chief, Shemihaza. Their children, the Nephilim, are giants that start to wreak havoc on earth. Enoch 7:3 says that the giants began to kill men and to devour them and then kill all the beasts and drink their blood. Sounds kind of like a horror film. This section also describes the Watchers as devious angels, skilled in evil supernatural arts, which they then taught to humanity. Chapter 8 says that the Watcher Asael taught weapons of war to humanity. Shemihaza taught them sorcery. Others taught humans how to do astrology. As the Watchers and Nephilim continue to devastate the earth and pollute humans with evil knowledge, the story culminates in humanity crying out to God for help. In response, God dispatches his 4 archangels to set things right. He instructs one to warn Noah about the coming flood, another to imprison the fallen angel Asael and cast him into darkness. God orders Gabriel to destroy the Nephilim with a downright chilling passage, telling Gabriel to go to the bastards, to the half-breeds, to the sons of miscegenation, and destroy the sons of the Watchers. Yikes. And finally, God commissions Michael to imprison the king of the Watchers, Shemihaza. In this story, God sends Enoch as a prophet or emissary to the Watchers to warn them that they'll be destroyed. The remaining sections of Enoch contain mostly prophecy and visions. Rather than summarizing each and every section, I want to focus on the major themes running through these prophecies. The expectation of a Messiah, final judgment, salvation, resurrection, and heavenly journeys. All of these are hallmarks of the cultural context and genre of First Enoch, Jewish apocalypticism. Apocalyptic literature is the name scholars call a bunch of texts that became super popular among Jews during the Second Temple period. These were texts that generally describe mystical visions of heaven, where an angel would reveal to a prophet the end times or a coming judgment of the world. Enoch is one of the oldest Jewish apocalyptic texts, even older than another famous apocalyptic text, the Book of Daniel. That's to say, if we follow the scholarly consensus that Daniel was composed during the Hellenistic era of the 2nd century BCE. Many of the terms commonly associated with Daniel, like the Son of Man and the Messiah, can be found first in the Book of Enoch. In one chapter, Enoch sees a vision in which the Son of Man is commissioned. He will be the staff for the righteous. He will be the light of the nations, and all who dwell on the earth will fall down and worship before him. For those of you familiar with the New Testament, this sort of language should sound familiar, as it's all applied to Jesus as well. But in this text, Enoch himself is named the Son of Man. Chapter 71:14 says, "You are that Son of Man who was born for righteousness." We also find the idea of hell in Enoch, another theological concept seen later in Christianity. Remember from my History of Hell video that the concept of hell does not exist in the older texts of the Hebrew Bible. It is a later innovation that gained popularity during the Second Temple period, especially in apocalyptic literature. In chapter 21:7, Enoch beholds a narrow chasm extending to the abyss, where he saw a great fire burning and flaming. The text says, "This place is a prison for the angels. Here they will be confined forever. Okay, so that's a summary of the content. Basically an entire text super concerned that the current world is evil and needs to be judged and renewed. A new age is at hand. God's final judgment is coming. But what about its later history? First Enoch was enormously influential for later Jews, Christians, and even Muslims. First, let's go through its history within Judaism. First Enoch influenced a bunch of non-canonical Jewish texts. In fact, Jubilees, another Second Temple Jewish text preserved in Ethiopic and found at Qumran in Hebrew, shares a lot of details with Enoch. However, although the Book of Enoch was a big deal for Second Temple Judaism, it plays almost no role in modern Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism rejected two major claims put forth by the Enoch spin-off literature. First, they rejected the notion that Enoch never died, and the idea that rebellious angels came to earth at the time of the flood. Because of this, Enoch doesn't formally appear in the canonical books of the Hebrew Bible, and only rarely in rabbinic literature. And even when it does appear, it appears in a negative light. One of the most important exceptions to the negative portrayal of Enoch in rabbinic literature is Third Enoch. This is a rabbinic Hebrew story of Enoch transforming into the angel Metatron. Metatron, the transfigured Enoch, is even described as a second or lesser Yahweh. While Enoch is mentioned in Third Enoch and some other mystical rabbinic texts, Rabbinic Judaism doesn't consider them standard. For example, the Babylonian Talmud, second only to the Hebrew Bible in importance for traditional Rabbinic Judaism, says that a famous rabbi became a heretic when he saw Metatron sitting in the presence of God and claimed that there are two powers in heaven. In the Talmud, Metatron and the rabbi are both punished, but this story reflects the Talmud's discomfort with the whole idea of Enoch becoming a divine being. Curiously, this is not the case in Kabbalah, medieval Jewish mysticism. Kabbalistic texts such as the Zohar not only view Enoch positively, but also compares him to Adam and refers to the Book of Enoch to explain ambiguous biblical verses. The scholar of late antique Judaism and Christianity, Annette Reed, suggests that this is a result of continuing cross-cultural Jewish and Christian dialogue throughout late antiquity, because apparently Christians really liked this text, at least at first. Like I said, the Book of Jude in the New Testament directly references First Enoch, and Enoch likely influenced the theology of the Gospels and the Book of Revelation. The idea of the Son of Man, for example, which appears in the Gospel of Mark, shares theological similarities with First Enoch. The last book of the New Testament, Revelation, closely resembles the apocalypse of the book of the parables, since both describe a throne room apocalypse partnered with a final judgment both in the heavens and on earth. Initially, First Enoch was a big deal for Christians. Church fathers such as Justin Martyr and Irenaeus use and reference First Enoch. Tertullian even defends the book's authority, and the non-canonical Epistle of Barnabas refers to First Enoch as scripture. However, by the 4th century, Enoch apparently fell out of favor. It's around this time that big-name church fathers like Augustine and Jerome rejected it. By the 7th and 8th centuries, First Enoch only remained popular in Ethiopia, which still remains true to this day, as part of the biblical canon of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. With over 81 books, the biblical canon is much wider in Ethiopian Christianity compared to other branches of Christianity. And by including Enoch, the book has left a lasting legacy on Ethiopian Christians. But Enoch was not only a big deal in Judaism and Christianity, he also appears in early Islamic traditions. The prophet Idris is mentioned twice in the Quran. The Quran commands its audience, and remember Idris in the book, verily he was truthful and a prophet. We raised him to a sublime station. Idris is typically associated with Enoch, although some also associate him with Elijah. And like what we see in the book of Genesis, his little blurb here is ambiguous. Many Muslim commentators debate what is meant by raised to a sublime station. In one hadith, one of the reported sayings, actions, and approval of the prophet reports that he met Idris in the 4th heaven during his miraculous ascension through the 7 heavens, typically rendered as the night journey in the west. Other commentators suggest that sublime station means that Idris was directly taken alive by God, which parallels the plain text of Genesis 5:24. So even though Enoch only earned a brief mention in his source text, Genesis, that one tiny blurb inspired an entire book that continued to influence religious traditions for centuries to come. The Qumran community, early Christians, early Muslims, Jewish Kabbalists and Ethiopian Christians today. And even though very few people today have read this book, the apocalyptic ideas introduced in Enoch, hell, salvation, the Son of Man, the coming of the Messiah, these ideas lay the groundwork for the central themes of Christian theology. Not bad for a work of spin-off literature. And just like how the Watchers taught magic to humanity, I'll be teaching a 2-week seminar, Magic in the Ancient World, on Speakeasy. It will be on Saturday, September 5th and September 12th at 3 o'clock p.m. We'll discuss magical rituals that the ancient Romans practiced, like curse tablets and healing spells. We'll talk about Roman laws enacted against magic and explore what this archaeological evidence reveals about the religious lives of people living in the late Roman Empire. Now, we're limiting the number of participants to just 12 people so that everyone who attends can really engage in the material and get their questions answered. I'd love to see you there. If you'd like to attend, a link to the seminar is.
Okay, so there you have the Book of Enoch. I actually have an Acrobat version of it, which I can send out along with the recording, so you can judge for yourself. Enoch goes off with these 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. And he visits, as you saw, something that looks like hell and something else that looks like heaven. And there's many other things in there. So you can judge for yourself how this guy did in terms of trying to capture what's going on. I'm just trying to give you the context for where this came from in this whole thing. But it's you know, the book of Enoch clearly, as he pointed out, had an influence on Kabbalah, the mystic side of Judaism, in the Zohar, and also with Muhammad, and it was simply thrown out of the New Testament, and in part because it was so radical compared to the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John Gospels. If you think about what I just said, this is so far out in left field that, you know, what would common people, quote unquote, make sense out of this? So that's you know, I'll leave you with that. I mean, any other questions? I'm going to go on to Taoism now with another video, but are there any other questions anybody has? We're just trying to whet your appetite for something that you might not run into every day, the Book of Enoch. Okay. Now we're going to go to Taoism, and we'll see how this turns out.
That which offers no resistance overcomes the hardest substances. That which offers no resistance can enter where there is no space. Few in the world can comprehend the teaching without words or understand the value of non-action. Lao Tzu. There's no proof that he truly ever lived, but if he did, it should have been somewhere around the 5th and 6th century BC, which makes him a contemporary of Confucius. Nevertheless, the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu wrote a masterpiece called the Tao Te Ching, which is the main work of Taoism. A well-known concept that has emerged from Taoist philosophy is Wu Wei, that can be translated as non-action, effortless action, or the paradoxical action of non-action. In a practical sense, we can describe Wu Wei as the state of flow, often referred to as the zone by athletes. When athletes are in the zone, they engage in action without striving and move through time and space almost effortlessly. There are no extremes, no worries, no ruminations. Everything seems to flow in a natural course. As an introduction to the beautiful tradition of Taoism, I would like to present you the philosophy of flow. The Tao Te Ching is a mysterious piece of art. Not only there's no consensus when exactly it was written, but the existence of its author remains disputed. Nevertheless, one thing is certain: the profundity of this work has left its mark on humanity to this day. Not to mention that the Tao Te Ching is the most translated work in world literature after the Bible. The essence of Taoist philosophy is living in harmony with the Tao, also called the Way. So, what is the Tao? That's a question we can't really answer, and it's futile to try. Our understanding of the Tao only goes as far as the limitations of our perception. What the Tao really is, and what it looks, feels, smells, or sounds like, remains a mystery. Moreover, the Tao that we speak of isn't the real Tao, according to Lao Tzu. Hence, the famous opening of the Tao Te Ching goes like this. The Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be spoken is not the eternal name. End quote. So, what knowledge is available about the Tao? Well, the Taoist philosophers emphasize over and over again that the true Tao is an all-encompassing force that is beyond our comprehension and cannot be perceived by the senses. And even though we can never grasp the true Tao, the goal is to live in agreement with it, which is strikingly similar to the Stoic approach to nature. So, how do we live in harmony with the way? Taoist literature doesn't really give one practical method to achieve this. However, we can find many clues that point to achieving stillness of mind, curbing the senses, being humble, and the cessation of striving in order to open ourselves up to the workings of the universe. This stillness of mind doesn't necessarily mean that we sit down somewhere with our eyes closed. The Taoists observe that stillness of mind can be combined with action, and if we are completely in the present moment, our actions will go effortlessly, without friction, and accompanied by a razor-sharp focus. So much so that it's almost ecstatic. In his biography, retired professional basketball player Bill Russell writes, "It was almost as if we were playing in slow motion. During those spells, I could almost sense how the next play would develop and where the next shot would be taken." End quote. The Taoist work Zhuangzi contains a story about a cook named Ting who engages in his work while in a state of flow. This grasped the attention of Lord Wen Wei, who was amazed about how elegantly the cook cut up oxen. When he commented him on his skill, Cook Ting laid down his knife and replied, "What I care about is the way, which goes beyond skill. When I first began cutting up oxen, all I could see was the ox itself. After 3 years, I no longer saw the whole ox. And now I go at it by spirit and don't look with my eyes. Perception and understanding have come to stop, and spirit moves where it wants. I go along with the natural makeup, strike in the big hollows, guide the knife through the big openings, and following things as they are. So I never touch the smallest ligament or tendon, much less a main joint." End quote. An essential part of the story is the condition of the knife that the cook uses. He stated that good cooks change their knives every year because they cut, and mediocre cooks change their knives every month because they hack. Cook Ting, however, was using the same knife for 19 years because he used it with skill and subtlety. This story connects to another essential teaching of Taoism, which is the power of gentleness. By forcing and striving, we might get the job done, but at the same time, we spend much more energy than necessary and possibly suffer from collateral damage. On the other hand, someone in a state of flow approaches a task intelligently, knowing when to act and when not to, and finds a balance between action and non-action. It's a matter of not too hot, not too cold. It's the golden path between anxiety and boredom. The idea behind non-action goes against the Western ideal of forcing and working harder and harder to get results. We are encouraged to be ambitious, to take control, and to strive. Meanwhile, many people suffer from depression, anxiety disorders, and sleep disorders. Are we burning ourselves out? We look down on passivity and often mistake it for laziness, but these are different things. When we look at nature, doing nothing makes way more sense than we tend to think. Results do not equal the amount of energy we spend. Results are the consequence of a series of actions. The funny thing about this is that many of these actions come naturally, and the task doesn't need more human intervention than necessary to steer it into the right direction. Isn't it so that many problems solve themselves? Taoism compares life to a river. The river already has a course, or several courses, and once we find ourselves in that river, We can swim against the current, we can hold on to a branch, or we can let go and go along with the stream. Most of our lives, we swim against the current, and we don't even realize it. Our mind believes that it can and should control the environment in order to survive, which is kind of egocentric, because the vast majority of processes within as well as outside ourselves are not in our control. I mean, let's face it, we don't control our bodily processes like digestion, blood flow, or the healing of wounds. We don't control other people. We don't control the future. We don't even control who we fall in love with and what people we find attractive. Everything outside our own faculties just goes into some direction, sometimes forced by intelligence, but mostly in a natural course. When we flow along with the current, we align ourselves with this natural course. This is the path of least resistance. It gives nature a chance to unfold without us resisting it. So the Taoist way is rather navigating through the river instead of trying to control it, something that will never work. Another aspect of the river that characterizes Taoism is the water itself. The characteristics of water are softness and humility that basically symbolize Taoist virtue. Here's a quote from the Tao Te Ching. The supreme good is like water, which benefits all of creation without trying to compete with it. It gathers in unpopular places, thus it is like the Tao. End quote. Water may be soft, but it overcomes hardness, which we can see in the erosion of rock. And water not only seeks the lower places, it also has no purpose, no goal, no specific desire. Yet it nourishes everything that it passes. It's an incredible life force that literally does God's work, but without any ambition. Water is the softest and most yielding substance, yet nothing is better than water for overcoming the hard and rigid, because nothing can compete with it. End quote. If you've ever experienced a state of flow, there's one thing that disappears and only comes back when the thinking mind takes back control. This is the focus on results rather than the task at hand. This reminds me of the Stoic concept of amor fati, which recommends one to embrace the outcome, whatever it may be, and instead of worrying about the future, focusing on what's in the present. No matter if you're completely immersed in sports, writing, a video game, or dancing, when you're in a state of flow, you forget the results, the pressure, the anxieties about the future, the failings of the past. It's just you and the task at hand. You are completely in the present, and the only way to do this is by letting go. Letting go means stop swimming against the current, stop holding on to some branches. It means letting go of the past, letting go of the future. Focus on this moment entirely and just live it without hesitation. Thank you for watching.
So there you have a little short overview of Taoism. As he pointed out, the Tao Te Ching is second only to the Bible in terms of how many copies have been printed of it. So it's clearly been hugely influential, especially in the East, and so forth. So let me just take a look here to see.
Is the Tao physics a completely separate?
What?
Is the Tao physics?
Yeah, the Tao of physics was meant to be, hold on, I'm just going to take us out of this. The Tao of physics was meant to take us to, again, going with the flow, finding the right way to go to find the true underlying physical theories. And the logic for this was that there were ideas in the East that the West was ignoring. And so the book was written. And so far, the West has still chosen, after 50 years, to ignore what the East had to say. But that's what happened. Just going to go. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to go cover, I just got to get out of this. Is By the way, Bruce, do you have any comments on the Buddhist view of Taoism? You're on mute.
It uses some of the same concepts. In Buddhism, you have stream and stream entry and also union, like some of the things that they were talking about is more kind of my understanding of what union is. There's a deeper state of union where you are not actually separate from reality or the world around you.
Right.
So it's somewhat familiar. I haven't studied Taoism, so I'm not an expert at all.
Yeah. Oh, he was probably 100 years before the Buddha. That sort of time frame. It's amazing how all of the people, the Buddha and Confucius and Lao Tzu and you had Aristotle and Socrates. They're all in the same time period. It's just amazing.
Right.
So now what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and wrap up our little excursion here into mathematics, and I'm going to cover something that's that people are probably not familiar with. In the area of mathematics, everything we've been talking about, everything you've probably taken classes in, is in what's called continuous or classical mathematics. But over the last, since in the 20th century, with Turing and other mathematicians like Gödel, there's been a whole area of mathematics developed, which is called discrete mathematics. And the difference between continuous and discrete is the discrete mathematics problems that we're going to see here. You can explain them to anybody. There's nothing amazing or whatever that you'll end up with here. They're all very, very understandable problems, but they lead to some incredible innovations in mathematics that have been, they're so new that people don't know what to do with them. So I'm going to focus on a colleague of mine from Bell Laboratories, Ron Graham. Ron Graham was one of the premier discrete mathematicians. He went a long way toward making this intellectually respectable toward other mathematicians. He published over 400 papers and wrote 6 books. Well, he passed on a year ago. But here we'll come up with the first one, which is he was proving a theorem, and when he proved the theorem, it was an actual an upper bound on a number, okay? But the number that he came up with to come up with this upper bound is the largest known number that anyone had ever used ever in any proof ever in the history of mathematics. So we're going to just start with, and you'll see you can understand everything in this. We're just going to take a look at what in the world was Ron Graham's number that he used here. So let's get this thing cranked up. Here we go.
I think most numberphile are fascinated by the idea of Graham's number, which is supposedly unimaginably big. But what actually is it? What does it count? Well, I think the best person to explain that is none other than the world-famous mathematician himself, Ron Graham.
Suppose you took 4 vertices of a square, and this is 2 dimensions, so it has how many vertices? 2 squared, 4 vertices. What I'm going to do is take these 4 vertices and put 2 more edges connecting all possible pairs of these vertices. So how many possible edges would you be able to draw? Well, there's something called the binomial coefficient, and there are 4 vertices, and you choose 2 of them, and this turns out to be 6. So you see there are 6 edges here. All the ways you could join these 4 dots. And now what we're going to do is take the 4 dots again and look at each one of these possible 6 lines and color them red or blue in any way that you like. So for example, I might color this one red, or maybe this one red, and then I'd say, okay, and maybe I'll color this one blue, and this one blue, and this one blue, and this one blue. Okay, so that's one way. And you might say, well, okay, so what? I'm looking for certain special configurations, and I'm not going to find it here in a square because this is too small. We need more dimensions. What about 3 dimensions? Well, what does a 3-dimensional cube look like? Well, I can't really draw it on a piece of paper, but you can kind of draw a version of it. Namely, if you take your 4 vertices that form your square, and then you kind of move it a little bit. Well, that's a picture that you might recognize. How many vertices, these corner points here? Well, you can see there are 8, which is 2 cubed. So the 3-dimensional cube has 2 cubed, 8 vertices, 28 possible line segments. And if you color them, say this one's red, and this one's red, and this one's red, and that one's red, but you know, a lot of the others are blue. And what you're trying to do is do it in a way that avoids something. Now, what is this thing you're trying to avoid? That's the whole point. You're trying to avoid forming the following configuration, namely 4 points in here someplace, and all the 6 line segments have the same color, in this case it's red. And furthermore, these 4 points lie in a flat plane. They don't stick up in 3 dimensions. Usually you took 4 points, you have 3 dimensions. It kind of spans a 3-dimensional volume. Here I want 4 points to be flat, and they form a square, and all 6 line segments are the same color. In 3 dimensions, you definitely can avoid such a configuration because this only seems to happen on just kind of the faces. And what you have to do, the challenge, is to go in a much larger dimension. Now, what do you mean by a cube in, say, 4 dimensions? Well, 4 dimensions, you could take this picture and translate it and join the lines, but it gets kind of messy. But yeah, I'm not afraid. I think I can do that. Let's see. Here's our 3-dimensional cube. Yep. And now I have to shift it. Okay, well, I got to be a little careful here. And now I join the corresponding things. Well, you can see it's going to be, this we could call it a tesseract. Now, how many different ways can you color these 120 different lines with red and blue? Well, each one of them, there are 2 choices. So it's 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 120 times, or 2 to the 120. Already beyond what computers can do. No computer can do 2 to the 120th things right now. Well, the problem, we're trying to avoid having this 4 points that form a square, lie in a plane, and have all 6 line segments the same color. And in 4 dimensions, you can do it. Not too hard to do. Well, what about a 5-dimensional cube? In 5, you can avoid it. 6, it takes more work. 7, yes, it takes a lot more work. The question is, can you always avoid it? The answer, no. If the dimension is large enough, you cannot avoid it. No matter how you try to color it, you can't avoid it. And when is that dimension finally reached? Well, you know it's reached by the time you get to a very large number, sometimes known as Graham's number, pretty big number. And you know for sure in that dimension, you cannot avoid it. And the proof that you can't avoid it is pretty complicated, pretty recursive. And that's what caused this number to be so large. Now, you might say, well, what's the truth? Sure, if you go as far as Graham's number, that dimension, you can't avoid it, but maybe you can already make it unavoidable in a smaller dimension. And it turns out that it appears that already in 13 dimensions, you can't avoid it. Now, how could you check that by computer? Well, okay, no problem, really. In 13 dimensions, so n is 13 dimensions. So how many vertices in your 13-dimensional cube? Well, 2 to the 13th vertices, which is what? That's about 8192. Okay, a little over 8,000 vertices. Well, how many line segments? Well, 8192 times 8191 over 2. You have to check, no matter how you color them with red or blue, you can't avoid one of these things. Well, it's uncheckable. You can't check that. It's impossible. You need to think. You can't just compute. Right now, we don't know. It's between 13. We know maybe 12 is not enough, it turns out. And this other slightly bigger number, which I can try to write it.
So there we go. As cubes move up through the dimensions from 3 dimensions that I think we all understand to 4 dimensions to 5, eventually we reach a number of dimensions in which one of these configurations must exist. And the upper bound on that, the point where it has to happen by, is this Graham's number. Now we know this number is unimaginably big. It was even in the Guinness Book of Records. But just how big is it? Well, that deserves a video all of its own. And again, we've got Ron Graham to explain it. The links are on the screen here. I've also put them in the description under the video. So why don't you check it out? It's a pretty big number.
So one thing you have to understand about Ron Graham is he's an incredible showman. So while he grew up in Northern California and became the trampoline champion for Northern California. And while he was going through graduate school at Berkeley, he ended up to get money. He went over to a local circus and performed on the trampoline so he could pay for his tuition and so forth.
Well-rounded.
Yeah, he also got into juggling, and he can juggle 3 and he can juggle 5 objects at once, and he became president of the United States Juggling Association. Okay, and so it goes. So I'm just going to go off here onto this little video where he covers this. This is something that was put together by Bell Laboratories, and he's trying to describe what in the world is discrete mathematics.
I'm William Lewis Gaddis, and this is the news on TV Theater. Many of our scientists and engineers have a talent for keeping numerous projects in the air, so to speak. Ron Graham is one of them. Ron Graham is a master mathematician and head of the discrete mathematics department at Murray Hill, and he's an expert juggler. On the surface, one would think juggling is an unusual hobby for a mathematician, but
Interesting, in fact, that many mathematicians and computer scientists have an interest in juggling. I think it's the search for patterns and structure that is responsible for this. Juggling is basically an algorithmic activity. That is one in which you need a definite plan, procedure, algorithm for accomplishing the various feats. And this is very typical of algorithms in computer science and discrete mathematics. For example, when you're throwing a ball from hand to hand, the path is roughly like this. And when it goes back to the other hand, it looks like this. And the question is, where do you fit the balls into the pattern? So for example, with 3 balls, they're about equally spaced. So they might be about here, here, and here. Whereas if you try to do the same thing for 4 balls, so you'd have a path like this. Of course, the balls go this way, this way. With 4 balls, if you try to have equal spacing, you will get collisions right in the middle. Whereas for 5 balls, then again, it would fit. So understanding which patterns are possible and in which ways they're possible with the fact that we have 2 hands and however many balls we're going to be using is an example of the interconnection between juggling and discrete mathematics.
Graham is the editor of over 20 mathematical journals. Recently, he became World Book Encyclopedia Scientist of the Year for 1980, and the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics awarded him the Polya Prize. He has also served as president of the International Jugglers Association.
I started looking at mathematics more seriously when I began college. And that was the same time, in fact, that I got into juggling. From that time until now, I've spent a fair amount of time in both activities.
The difference between continuous and discrete mathematics is significant, as Ron Graham explains.
Basically, you can divide mathematics into two parts, the continuous and the discrete. Now, the continuous tends to deal with smoothly varying quantities. For example, it's the same distinction you would use between analog versus digital. In a continuous or analog signal, you might have the amplitude varying in a smooth manner like this, whereas in a discrete or digital situation, the curve might vary in a much more abrupt way. The kinds of mathematics that deal with continuous are things like calculus, differential equations, whereas for digital or discrete processes, there are discrete algorithms in computer science and algebra, combinatorics, that kind of mathematics.
Recently, Graham and his staff assisted the Traffic Network Planning Department in designing a more efficient long-distance network, and discrete mathematics was a very important part of that task.
By looking at their problems and building a mathematical model to capture the essential parts of the problems, we were able to simplify much of what they were trying to do, and as a result, I think that there will be considerable savings in the long run for the Bell system.
Graham's latest challenge, you might say, is rather far out.
Boomerangs are basically kind of a long-distance juggling, and of course there are many different kinds. And the challenging thing about boomerang throwing, as about juggling, is not just throwing, but of course catching. And the problem comes normally when there's a little wind. A little wind makes a tremendous difference in trying to make a boomerang come right back to the spot that you threw it from.
Mathematicians and computer scientists are forever looking for ways to develop new and better algorithms which might be just as difficult as trying to catch two boomerangs at the same time. Computers and computer software are essential tools for much of our work. A talking terminal may sooner...
So there you have, something that you just get rid of this. It gives you a taste, just so you'd have some appreciation. In the year 1900, the German mathematician David Hilbert gave an address at an international congress of mathematicians, and he posed 23 problems that he thought would stimulate advances in mathematics from the year 1900 on. And when we got to the middle 1970s, probably 2/3 of these problems had been, in some sense, solved and had stimulated a great deal of math. And so the mathematicians that were around said, well, we need a new set of 23 problems that, like David Hilbert came up with. So they proposed these problems, and Ron Graham said, well, those problems are all in continuous math. You missed all the problems now that we're doing in discrete math. And in fact, they're probably even harder than the ones that you came up with. And so they actually stopped, publishing this thing and did their own version of it. So let's take a look at one final thing here that you'll see what he did. And again, you're getting a real feel for discrete mathematics.
You say you'd like a lesson cheating at cards. Well, you might actually be better at it than you realize. So what we can do is let's get a deck of cards here. We have a deck of cards. And in poker, the hand has 5 cards, and some hands are better than others. For example, if this hand had, say, 2 3s and 2 6s, that's 2 pairs. That's excellent. Or maybe if your hand had 3 9s, that's 3 of a kind. That's really quite a good hand. So let's imagine that you're playing poker, say dealing with 5 players, and you need 25 cards. And so here's about 25 cards. And why don't you pick those up and deal some number one at a time, face down, just to kind of mix them up a little bit there. Some 8, 10 cards, whatever you like. It's pretty good. Now square them up and give them a good little shuffle. Okay, so we can kind of see. Shuffle. Okay. And now let's pick them up and deal our 5 poker hands. Okay. Right. 5 players. Each one gets the first card. Second card. Third card. And finally the 5th card. Now, if you were kind of cheating, you might want a particular person to have a very good hand. For example, let's see what the hand we have. The player right here. What does he have? He has a ace, queen, 8, 2. I'm afraid that's not a very good hand. But this is a warm up. So let's pick up the packs in some order, any order you like. But make one big pack out of everything. Some order. Create some order. Okay. Now let's deal 5 more poker hands. Okay. So that was the warm up version. This is the real thing. 4 coming in. And finally, everybody gets 5th card. Okay, now if you were really good at cheating, you might like this person, for example, have a very good hand. So why don't we turn over the cards one at a time? See what he's got. 5, very good. Another 5, very good. 3 5s, wow. 4 5, 4 of a kind. Fantastic, very good. You really are a lot better than you thought. But you know, actually, if you're going to make money cheating cards, you might like this person to have a very good hand, 4 of a kind. He's going to bet a lot, and maybe your confederate in this position has a better hand. So let's turn over his cards. He has a king of spades, a 10 of spades, a jack of spades, a queen of spades, an ace of spades, a royal flush, the very best possible hand. That is fantastic. Congratulations. You are really good at cheating. You may wonder how that previous trick was done. Well, it depends on a principle in magic called the Galbraith principle. And here's an example of the Galbraith principle. Here we have an arrangement of cards, ace 2 3 4, ace 2 3 4, ace 2 3 4, kind of periodic. Okay, so turns out if you take this arrangement, and it doesn't depend on 4, but this I'm using 4 for an example, and you put down in reverse order some number of cards. I don't know how many that was really. You take these 2 packs and you shuffle them together, which I will do. Shuffle together. Now, with this shuffled deck, which is in an arrangement called the Galbraith permutation, has the property if you take 4 consecutive cards from the top and look at them, you'll see you have ace 2 3 4 in some order. Here are the next 4 cards, 1 ace, 1 2, 1 3, 1 4. The next 4 cards, 1 ace, 1 2, 1 3, and 1 4, and so forth. And that was the basis on which the previous trick was done. Now you might say, how does the Galbraith principle relate to the Mandelbrot set, which of course is one of the most celebrated constructs in mathematics? It turns out that one of the iterative steps in constructing the Mandelbrot set takes a particular number, say C, and you keep squaring and adding C to whatever you had. So for example, starting with 0, you square 0, which is 0, and add C, you get C. Now again, if you have C, you take C squared plus C. That's some number. And you take that number, square it, and add C. Certain values of C have the property that you end up back at 0 after some finite number of steps. And if you take those values that you get going from 0 back to 0 and arrange them in an appropriate order, you will get an example of the Galbraith arrangement, the Galbraith shuffle. And this is kind of the connection between iterating this quadratic map and the Galbraith principle. But I can't really say too much more about it here. But if you want to know a lot more about it, you might want to read the coverage we get in Magical Mathematics, which is a recent book by Percy Diakonis and myself, and we spill all the secrets about that in this book.
So now you're all experts in discrete mathematics. You can see there was nothing that was covered here that was kind of bizarre or whatever. You could explain it to anybody. So what I did was, Ron Graham was nice enough to prepare a homework problem that we're all going to get passed out, and you'll all get to work on this on your own. And this is what's called a bicycle assembly problem. Okay, so I'm just trying to look here to see. This thing is a little hard to read. Okay, here's the problem here. So you've just been put in charge of an assembly line for bicycle manufacturing. The first thing you learn is that assembling a bicycle is broken up into a number of specific smaller jobs. We have the frame preparation, including the installation of the front fork and fenders. We have the mounting and front wheel alignment. We have the mounting and back wheel alignment. We have attaching the derailleur to the frame. We have attaching the gear cluster. We have attaching the chain wheel to the crank. Then we have attaching the crank and chain wheel to the frame. Then we have mounting the right pedal and hip and toe clip, mounting the left pedal and toe clip, and then final assembly, including mounting and adjustments of the handlebars, the seat, the brakes, and so forth. Okay, so those are the steps, and the problem is that each of the steps takes a certain amount of time in minutes. Okay, so for example, you can see here 7 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Final assembly is 18 minutes. Okay. Now, we're not quite done yet, because certain of these jobs must be done before others. You try mounting the front fork to the bicycle frame. If the brake cables are already attached, it doesn't work. Okay, so there's an order in which you have to do these things. Okay, and the order is described here in what's called a precedence order. So this job in this column must be preceded by the jobs over here in this column. Okay, that's what it is. Okay, and so now, because of space and equipment constraints, the 20 assemblers are paired together into 10 teams of 2 people each. So the goal is to have each team assemble 15 bicycles in one 8-hour shift. So since we have 10 teams doing this, we're going to do 150 bicycles, 15 times 10 in one 8-hour shift. That's the idea. Now, the factory quota of 150 bicycles is our quota for what's going on. The team of the 2 assemblers has to follow this precedence order in here to put these things together. And it takes a certain amount of time to do each of these steps that we saw. And so we go ahead and do this, and without taking any time off, without any bathroom breaks or snack breaks or anything, the assemblers just work at this. So you can take a look at this, and the first question is to just look at each of these assemblers on a team and what they're doing at time, and the question comes up: will each team be able to do 15 bicycles in an 8-hour shift? I'll tell you the answer right now. It's yes. Okay, but you have to check this out for yourself. Okay, now here's where the fun starts. You rent electric power tools for all the assemblers. Okay, so the times that are required to do each of the jobs decreases by 1 minute. The power tools are just great. Okay, so if we now go ahead and put the bikes together, will you be able to do 15 bikes in an 8-hour shift? What do you think the answer is now that you've got power tools? The answer is no. It takes longer. You can't do it in 8 hours, even with this, okay? Well, okay, so now let's go back. Let's get rid of these power tools and we'll add a third person, a third assembler to each of these teams. Now I've got 3 people instead of 2 people. Now the question comes up, will you do 15 bicycles in an 8-hour period? You can work it out, and I'll tell you right now, the answer is no. With more people, it takes more time with 3 people than with 2 people. You can't do it. And then finally, for 2 assemblers per team, there's what's called a critical path schedule. I'll leave that for you to figure out what it is, okay? So here's a typical problem. Ron Graham came up with this, and this is typical in computer operating system scheduling, work scheduling, where you find out that when you put more work into the computer, or make the processor faster, sometimes it takes longer to do the job, not less time. And this was actually observed and led to this phenomenon being studied. And this is actually intrinsic to these sorts of scheduling problems. That is, there's nothing, there's nothing magic here. It's just that for certain situations, if you shorten the time it takes to do everything, it takes longer in total. If you add more people, it takes longer, not less time to do things. And people have observed these things in real life. There are many projects that I worked on where people added extra people and they had a disaster. The most well-known of this is a book by a guy named Fred Brooks, who was at IBM, and he called it the Mythical Man Month. So the Mythical Man Month is where you take a team of 10 people and they're going to spend 1 year and build this chunk of software for you. And so they go at it for 6 months, and after 6 months, they're only 3 months of the way there. Got a problem. We're not going to make it in a year. What do you do? Oh, it's simple. I just put 10 more people on it, right? Now I've got twice as many people, and I'll be able to catch up and get it done in a year. So they go at it with 10 more people, and they go at it for another 3 months. Now they're at the 9-month mark. And the problem they discovered was that the extra people all got to get trained by the first group of people to know what they're doing. And in doing this, they now have 6 months to go, even though there's only 3 months left. And they've got 30 people on this thing. And so the solution, of course, is to put another 30 people onto it. Now that you've got 30 people, to try and get it done in 1 year. That's why it's called the Mythical Man Month. You simply can't do these things. And so it goes. So
women know this instinctively. They know it's just better to do it yourself.
Yes. That's why it's not called the Mythical Woman Month. So I'll send this problem out, and you can play with it, and we'll see what people come up with for comments. Let me just get out of this for the time being.
So Bart, can I share another story about IBM? So a friend of mine was a consultant for their big plant in New York. And as most people know, their output for a day would fit in a shoebox. And he was a consultant. And every time he got invited into a meeting to do a project, he would sit there and listen to him and then convince them that they didn't need him. And what he was really doing is he was buying bars. He wasn't making his money off the bars. He was making his money off the video games and the Pac-Man that was in the bars in the college towns. And I just think that's one of my favorite stories about high tech, and how to make money.
Right. Now that was Nolan Bushnell with Pong. That was the original bar game machine. Pong. Anyway, it's a good one, but thank you. So that's what we wanted to try and cover tonight. I just wanted to give you the reason why we're spending time on the mathematics side of things, and especially the discrete mathematics, is that it appears that this is really what is underlying a lot of the unity that we see around us. And then in fact, it's the algorithms that drive everything around us that is the work of really a truly great creator. Whoever came up with these algorithms, it's just incredible to make the universe work. And we'll see that as we get further into this, going forward. So I just want to plant these ideas in your head that you'll see more things like this going forward. Next time, we're going to have Barbara spending some time on Ho'oponopono, and we'll spend time on Kabbalah. And we have a couple of other things we're going to try and cover as well. Barbara, are you all set for that? Am I putting words into your mouth, or we can delay? Oh wait, you're on mute.
Okay. Yeah, we'll get there. It'll be ready.
You'll be ready. Okay. That's fine.
Yay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay.
Judith, wait, Barbara wanted to ask Judith a question.
Go ahead.
Judith, do you see a parallel between Urantia and the Book of Enoch?
Between what?
Judith, you're on mute.
The book Urantia and the Book of Enoch?
I know that, well, the Book of Enoch's, I have the other one. I guess this is the third copy. I couldn't get the first. And I'm sorry, I didn't get the first book you said.
Urantia?
Oh, Urantia.
Uh-huh.
I find them much different. Urantia is more on the universe, the first part of it, not the part with Jesus in it, but the first part, the universe and how old and how it's expands. I didn't get that out of the Book of Enoch. To me, they're a lot different. They're not the same.
Okay.
But as I said, I don't have the first Book of Enoch.
Okay, thank you. I was just curious because it seemed like there was maybe a few similarities, but I don't know the books that well yet. So I was just curious because I know that you studied Urantia.
Yes, no, the Urantia, I have the book and I've gone through the whole thing. And I found somebody to discuss it with, and then they moved. So.
Oh, wow.
You have to do Zoom.
I have to.
Well, thank you.
Okay. So with that, we will reconvene next week, and we're using MailChimp to send out these notices. Is that, we're just trying to automate as much as we can. So,
Mail. Okay.
It's kind of like Constant Contact.
Uh-huh. I don't know what any of those are.
It works fine for me. Thank you for tonight.
okay,
We're planted, a lot of this is a lot of introduction that's going to take off in various directions. It might seem kind of random right now, but when it comes together, it'll be really elaborate.
yeah.
Hey, Bart, completely off topic, but I just have to ask because I've thought about it, wanting to ask 7 times today to you. What do you think about this new news about fusion being possibly solved?
About what being solved?
Fusion energy. Have you seen today's news with this new machine that's been developed by the Chinese?
For 75 years, I've seen people claiming fusion is just around the corner.
I know.
And press releases, and the issue is to get to, sustainability, where the amount of energy you put in is less than the amount of energy you take out. People
Right,
did
right.
fusion before, but that wasn't too useful. So I'll take a look. I didn't notice.
Yeah, just an article I saw on BBC World News today, and I thought, well, I'd ask you in case you'd seen something.
Yeah. Yeah, all of the stuff that I've seen so far, it's always, they're always saying it's 5 years out, 10 years out, every 5 years.
My older sister was trying to work on this stuff 40 years ago. So
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take a look and I'll get back to you.
Okay,
Well,
thanks.
If I may, I just wanted to make a comment about healthcare. I was on NPR again this morning. The program was on cancer. And I wanted to apologize from Mama Frodo because she was absolutely right about our medical system being broken and that we have like the highest percentage of deaths from COVID. And I didn't get to see much of this. I got to watch the program, but I didn't get to hear much of it because I was on a program at the same time with the state, who's influencing energy climate policy at the Connecticut State House. And that's of course the Eversource and the energy companies. But nobody's talking about the negative impact that that's had on healthcare. So I want to continue this conversation when we have more time, but I think that this group would definitely be into it. I was also on a call last week with Bob Emiliani, who's like the father of lean in Connecticut, and the future of lean is digital. So it all goes back to the math and the numbers. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, great. So we will see everybody next week. Thank you for the time, and watch for the recording to come out.
Thank you as well. See you later.
Okay.
You're
Very
welcome.
good.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.